Welcome once again to the Hour of the Time. I'm your host, William Cooper. From a distance, everything seems rosy. Looking from a long way at the Earth, down below from space, as our astronauts are prone to do from time to time, everything looks beautiful. The Earth is covered with clouds of moisture, the vast expanse of the blue oceans, and, of course, the land masses that we know as the continents. But when you come down and begin to focus in certain areas, the view takes on somewhat of a different appearance. And this evening, our special guest, Professor G.C. Schellhorn, who's written several books and has been conducting research into the UFO phenomenon for many years, is going to help us concentrate on one or two, or possibly three, of these areas, with which he has become somewhat of an expert. Let me introduce now Professor G.C. Schellhorn, and could you give us a little bit of your background, and then we'll begin probably talking about what you found out is taking place in Alabama.
Yeah, Bill, good to be here. I was an English prof for 20 years, and I enjoyed my work, but it was time to do something else, and I was becoming more and more interested and concerned with some of the material that I was reading about and learning about. And as you know, once you get involved in this field, it's like a bottomless pit, and it kind of swallows you up and keeps you going. I have no regrets, but I used to tell people when I was introduced, or when they introduced me, to say I quit teaching so that I could teach, and that sounded cute, but there was some truth to it.
There's a lot of truth to it. Yeah, there's nothing like a mystery, and this is basically what got your attention. Well, I assume that it would be. It's certainly what gets most people's attention, is that there's a real mystery here. What is going on in Alabama?
Well, let me preface that, and I'll come right to it with a remark or two. There has been quite a bit of investigation of cattle mutilations and other animal mutilations connected with UFOs. And that's sensational stuff and interesting stuff. And then we've got the sensational human abduction story. No one publicly that I know of, UFO investigator, has really been talking about the connection between the two. It's perhaps not a one-to-one connection, but it's a one-to-two connection. There is a close connection, and I think some of the investigators who have looked into either one or the other field have failed to make the connection, or at least failed to do it publicly. Now, I've talked to a couple of other UFO investigators in the last few months, and they've drawn pretty much the same conclusions that I have. Tentative conclusions, but no one's been saying it publicly, so I'm here to do that.
Great. Well, I think the reason people don't talk about these things publicly, and I think I addressed the cattle mutilation and human mutilations in the relation to the experimentation of blood in some of my lectures in 1989, but I got off into not the specifics. I wanted to find out what's the overall picture and who's doing all this and why, and that's how I got involved in a lot of the things that I'm doing now. But you have focused continually on this, and
recently I have. What's interesting is that in the United States we have it appears the Greys involved in the larger number of human abductions, and it appears from the circumstantial and a little hard evidence that we have that a particular group of Greys are involved in the cattle mutilation cases, the thousands, by the way, of cases of cattle mutilation since the middle and early 60s that are still going on. A lot of people think a lot of that activity has dropped off. It hasn't. Now, as I said, it appears to be closely related to a Grey group in North America. Now, this is not true in South America, where the human abductions that are taking place don't seem to have the dark cloud, emotional cloud that accompanies so many of them in this country. And the abducting the abducting species of extraterrestrial in South America, if we can believe the descriptions of the people that have been abducted and the contactees, they're different. They're different species.
We need to clarify a few things for our listeners, some of whom may not know anything about what we're talking about. By grays, you're talking about a reported species of extraterrestrial that is supposedly visiting the Earth, and nobody can prove that they are or that they are not. And you're taking the descriptions of this particular group from the related stories of the people who claim to have been abducted. And in reality, neither you or I know the truth about all of this. We have to listen to the stories and try to put the evidence together and see what we come up with.
That's true, and we got a problem with when we say grays, too. People in the field notice, the public isn't aware that there's increasing evidence that when we say grays, in the past we've thought of one particular species. Grays that appear to come anywhere from 3.5 feet tall to 6.5 feet tall, and we may be dealing here with several different species that we, because of our ignorance, have lumped into one pot, which has been causing some problems. Actually, there's another problem. You know, as you well know, there's one problem after another in this field. The public, generally speaking, has come to accept the idea that we may be having some extraterrestrial activity on this planet, that we may be being visited. The polls suggest anywhere from 50 to 80%.
That's correct. In fact, the last Gallup poll that I'm aware of suggests that a good majority of Americans believe that we are being visited by extraterrestrial beings and that the UFO sightings are the product of this visitation. I also want to caution my listeners that this information is being presented to you as information. Neither I nor Professor Shellhorn know the truth or accuracy of the statements of these people who are being abducted. We are presenting to you the findings of research, and whether or not you believe it, of course, is subject to your own willingness or lack of willingness to get involved or to believe anything like this. But my standard admonition applies, folks. You should listen to everyone, no matter what they're talking about. Read every possible thing that you can get your hands on, but believe no one and nothing until you yourself can verify whatever it is that you're interested in your own research. In this time when a lot of deception is being put out into the world, we have to do that, but we have to listen to everything so that we don't get caught and become a prisoner of our own belief structure.
Yeah, I want to speculate a little now, because I think we have to sooner or later and draw some tentative conclusions, even if they turn out finally to be wrong. But we need to do that so we can grow and move forward. In many of the animal mutilation cases, cattle mutilation cases, the hundreds and hundreds of cases that have taken place in the West and are still taking place in the West and in the Southwest and the central part of the country, and right now, especially in northern Alabama around Albertville and the Fife area, and also on the border between Mississippi and Louisiana. In many of those cases, not all, but in many, besides the various cuts that have been made with what appears to be a laser-like weapon that cuts very cleanly and cuts very concisely and burns the flesh, but only in the very immediate vicinity of the incision. Whereas if you move back just a little bit, the flesh isn't cooked, which suggests it's really fast and really sharp. But what I want to concentrate on right now is that a great deal of bovine blood has been taken. Cattle blood has been drained from the carcasses.
The actual police report states that the body, the actual blood system, the circulatory system, has been drained with no vascular collapse, which indicates that they may have injected a gas to push the blood out.
Right. Because if you and I are with the methods, at least that we know of, the conventional methods of taking blood out of an animal, as any good mortician will tell you, the vascular system is going to collapse. But anyway, what are they doing with all the blood? No one has ever seen an extraterrestrial in the field looming over a cow sucking its blood with its fangs, Dracula style or anything. I've heard some what I consider kind of wild speculation, that they feed by osmosis, and they dip their arms in vats of blood. There's no evidence of that we have at all. I find that a little far-fetched. But this I don't find far-fetched. We use calf blood and have for a long time in laboratories to facilitate tissue growth. Now, it's a small DNA step between calf blood and mature cow blood. Now, if you're doing biogenetic engineering, let's say, as there's some evidence that at least one of these gray species is doing in North America, and using humans, abducted humans or ova and sperm to facilitate this kind of bioengineering, and perhaps they're creating hybrid forms for one motive or another that we could talk about. Well, let's go on here for a second. If you can use, we know now too, in the last few years we've learned that bovine blood can be used in emergency situations for a human blood transfusion.
That's correct. In fact, there's been quite a few newspaper articles written about it, and an awful lot of scientific research has validated that can be done. Sounds strange.
Yeah, it does. It's not ideal, but it can be used. We also have been told in the last few years that they've got an artificial plasma now that can be used, an artificial blood. But what I'm trying to suggest here is, why do these abducting, mutilating extraterrestrial entities want all of this cattle blood? And I'm suggesting that maybe because of some rather controversial video footage now that is circulating and hard to come by, that either our government or the extraterrestrials in combination with our government, or the extraterrestrials on their own, or an American corporation, such as Sandy Corporation, which is known to be interested in bioengineering, are hybridizing. And I'm suggesting that now that we know what we know about what we can do with bovine blood, that they may have been using this blood to create what I would call an artificial womb situation. So that the blood flows through. Now there are some pictures, as I say, there is some video, and it remains to be checked out thoroughly yet. But it's disturbing material because it purports to be from underground Dulce or some underground laboratory, bioengineering laboratory, either extraterrestrial or human. If it's one of our laboratories, let's say it's doing this, it's still fascinating and somewhat shocking, because the pictures show vessels that are 5 feet tall, maybe 3-4 feet wide, filled with a liquid, and inside that liquid are dozens of small little fetus-like, they're either little grays or little hybrids growing. And this makes you ask, well, why are they growing all of these little fellows? Now, in South America, for instance, I'll give you a case. Wendell Stevens published a book called UFO Contact from Mirasol, which concentrated on, he published several. One of them was also called UFO Contact from Moringa. One of those cases is the Carlos Antonio Ferrara case. He was abducted by a group that is not gray-like. It actually has somewhat pointed ears, about 5 feet 5 inches tall, some of them brown skin, some of them greenish skin, some had red hair, some had black hair, but they all looked very much like. Anyway, they told him that they had 84 viable hybrids. And by the way they worded their statements, it appeared that they had lost a few, but that they still had 84 human and extraterrestrial hybrids that were living. Now, this suggests to me that if there's more than one extraterrestrial group visiting us, I know this, and many other investigators know this. The public may find this a little hard to believe. As I said, they've just come around in the last 20 years or so, half or more of the population believing we might be being visited by one group. Now we're saying there's multiple groups out there, and many of these groups may be doing their own bioengineering experiments. But the cattle mutilation, generally speaking, it appears that much of the cattle mutilation that has gone on in North America has been related to a gray group. Unlike Europe, and unlike South America and Central America. Why the Greys have captured our imagination and seem to appear so much in contactee reports, I don't know. It makes you wonder why are they still allied with us? And then we get back to conspiracy ideas like did our government in the middle 60s or some other time make an agreement with a particular Grey or a particular extraterrestrial.
Or is this whole thing some fantastic mind control operation to cover up very illegal and very questionable activities by humans? We don't know any of these answers, do we?
No, we don't. And we could probably argue if we really got going here. I think that supposition you just offered there, or proposition, is true. How true? To what extent it's true? There are powers that be, and there are agencies of our government and other governments that definitely want to confuse us from day to day.
Absolutely.
But I do believe the evidence suggests to me that I heard Norio Hayakawa the first evening here, and he was talking about China Lake and Area 51, and I found what he had to say about the areas rather interesting. But when he said, I don't believe there are any extraterrestrial visitors, that this is all mind work, and so that we can be manipulated mentally. I don't believe that. I believe we're being manipulated very often mentally and emotionally by forces outside our control, and many of those are official forces and very clandestine forces. But I also know that we've got an extraterrestrial presence here on the planet, and part of our need to know is crucial for us to find out what it means and why it's here.
Absolutely.
To sum that last few statements up, let me say I'm not so much worried about the extraterrestrial presence here as I'm worried about the human presence and what we can do to each other.
Them's my sentiments exactly, as my listeners well know. I went the other way. I started out believing wholeheartedly that all of this, because of what I'd seen in naval intelligence, was extraterrestrial, and began to realize that I may have been used. And now I'm not willing to rule out the presence of extraterrestrials, but neither am I willing to accept that everything that's going on is extraterrestrial in nature.
Well, I don't think it all is. Definitely not. I'll tell you what, though, my wife and I'll tell you, this is a little funny story, but we were headed to a small UFO conference in Neenah, Wisconsin, the August before last. And it was a warm day, and it's a 3.5-hour drive, so we were laughing a little bit. And I said, Pat, I should go in there and tell them I just saw a big UFO. And she said, you do that, and you go in there and your credibility is shot for the next couple of days. Well, the next night, after the first day of the conference, coming back on a highway, there was a very large, the first UFO I've seen that I was sure of since I was 12 years old. Anyway, it was hanging off the highway. It was low in the sky, was very large, very bright, and other people saw it. But I said to my wife, I said, "Now look there. Do you see what I see?" And she said, "Yes." And then we really had a good laugh, because I did go into the conference the next day, and I had a blackboard behind me, and I said, "Did anybody see anything unusual driving back to the motel last night?" And several people raised their head and described what we had seen. So yeah, I don't think you have to see a UFO to start believing that it's. You can read and keep up with. If you keep up a little bit, there's enough good, strong circumstantial evidence and some hard evidence. I held a piece of UFO in my hand last summer. Gave it to a MUFON investigator. The people came to me, and they were very gracious people from Arkansas. A daughter in Texas, and then her father in Arkansas. A UFO had landed on their farm. They had seen the UFO land. The children had seen it. The mother had seen it. The father saw it. The next morning they went out. There was scorched area in this particular set down, and there was some big metal drippings. They must have been doing a repair job of some kind. Well, they had some of this stuff. They had quite a bit of it.
What happened to it?
Well, I know where it is, and I'm sending someone who's more interested in this kind of field investigation than myself to get a piece of it and have it analyzed, and they will. But I gave a piece to this MUFON investigator, and I thought they'd do something about it. And every time I run into him, I said, "Well, what have you analyzed the piece yet?" I even offered to help pay for the analysis, and I don't know how he ducks his head and goes the other way.
This is typical of MUFON. In Gulf Breeze, a saucer was spotted over a schoolyard and actually dripped its liquid onto the schoolyard, which made a puddle. Investigators got samples of the liquid, sent it to MUFON for analysis. MUFON, by the way, folks, is the Mutual UFO Network. It's supposedly a very scientific investigative organization, but the truth is what Dr. Shellhorn or Professor Shellhorn has just described is what happens always with MUFON. So I've taken to call them GUFON instead of MUFON, simply because samples disappear, nothing happens, information is dropped into a black hole and never surfaces again, and this is to me is just as questionable as the UFO mystery.
Well, I'm not really angry at MUFON. I just feel that they need to expand open their mind a little more, and
they need to do what they say they're supposed to be doing.
They're in the UFO field. They're the real hardware people that are always looking for hard evidence. I mean, they gotta have it. But when they find it, it never satisfies them. But they do. Let's say they go out and they find a piece of a UFO, and they send it to a lab, and the lab just says, "Well, yes, we know that this kind of magnesium cannot be produced with the kind of processes we have on this planet. It's too pure." This has happened in the past, by the way, with magnesium.
But what they mean is not really on this planet. What they mean is it has to be done in a gravity-free atmosphere, which could be in orbit, and actually could have been done on something that we have in orbit.
But anyway, so the person, let's say this particular investigator or group of investigators, will find this piece of evidence, and they dance around it and celebrate it and get real excited, and they do that, and then they get a little tired of it finally, and they decide they got to have another piece, and then they find it. Actually, sooner or later, if they're lucky, they'll find it. And they dance around that and they celebrate it.
The truth is, and I've said this many times, if I could find a real alien, a real live extraterrestrial alien, and could produce this extraterrestrial at a press conference, nobody would accept that as evidence, because then they'd want me to prove that I didn't engineer this thing in a laboratory. Right. So that there is nothing ever that is going to function as proof enough, unless you could actually take that person from this planet to another planet and let them live there for a week or two. And we don't know if that could be done, because this is all conjecture anyway. But the point is that nothing is accepted as proof, and really, when you get down to it, wouldn't we be very foolish to be so readily accepting of whatever comes along? Because the truth is, maybe they could produce one of these things in a laboratory and show it talking to the president and shaking hands, and the next thing you know, we don't have a Bill of Rights.
Well, you can start on the hardware end, or you can start on the highly theoretical, metaphysical end, and some people do. But I think sooner or later you got to try and understand both ends, and maybe it's possible to get a little closer to the truth that way. I know you're not going to find it on the far end of either one on the spectrum. It doesn't matter which end. It's not on the far end, and I think it's probably a compromise of somewhere in the middle. Now, you want to talk about Alabama?
Let's
cattle mutilations.
Let's get into that.
Well, there have been 26 cattle mutilations in northern Alabama since October. They follow the classic lines of cattle mutilations all over the country in the 60s, 70s, 80s, and 90s.
For our listeners who may not know what that is, could you explain what are the classic?
Okay, the classic cases look something like this. Many of the cattle will have their udders removed. Again, all of this with a very sharp instrument. It appears a laser-type instrument that cuts very cleanly and cauterizes. Right. All right. Udders, the tits, the genitalia area. That very often female and male genitalia have been reamed out, perfect cuts, and taken completely. Tongue area. Gums, sometimes ears, sometimes eyes. those are that doesn't cover it all, but that's close to the spectrum. What's curious here, partly, is that all those areas are real good areas to take samples from if you were going to clone. But I can't imagine why anyone would need as many thousands of cattle to do a lot of cloning. But what I'm trying to suggest is your genitalia area in your mouth, for instance, your tongue, you know how quickly they heal. They heal a little quicker than other parts of your body. You can clone from any cell in the human body, but that kind of flesh is a little more viable. I wouldn't be surprised that somewhere somebody is cloning a few cattle, and for what reasons I don't know.
Well, they've admitted in the scientific papers that they have cloned a cow.
Oh yeah, but I mean extraterrestrials are cloning somewhere, but I don't think that explains. I think some of these mutilation cuts and the draining of blood are done for experimental reasons. We just have visitors here who are curious to see what kind of pollution levels we have in our animals and what kind of growth levels, but that doesn't explain it all. And when we say that the great majority seems to be when UFOs have been present or entities have been seen on the ground, as they have in several cases near cattle that have been mutilated, they've been this particular gray type entity. Now, when I started looking into this, because I wasn't satisfied with what other investigators had done and the conclusions they had drawn, I went to a neighboring county, and lo and behold, I found out that in my own backyard there was more going on than I can believe.
Hold that thought, because I've got to interrupt here for just a second, folks. This is our break time, as you all know, the steady listeners. Sit back or go to the kitchen and get yourself something to drink or something to eat, and don't go away. We'll be right back after this very short pause. Talking about this, the cattle mutilation phenomena somehow has been connected with the UFO phenomena, mainly because UFOs have been hovering over the fields where they found mutilated cattle. The assumption that it's extraterrestrial is so far that, based upon abduction reports and witness accounts, this has been connected with it also. It's a real mystery. It needs to be looked at. Somebody is certainly doing this, and we need to find out who it is, and this is one of the possibilities. Now, just in case you think that Professor Shellhorn has made any of this up, he certainly has not. He has in his hand a whole fistful of actual police and sheriff department reports, and I've investigated this from time to time in the Southwest where I live. And this is an ongoing phenomenon, not just in Alabama, but in many different places. And these mutilations are real, and the police departments of these rural areas and the sheriff's departments are very familiar with it. And there are many people investigating. One book that I would highly recommend is Linda Howe's book, An Alien Harvest. She also did an award-winning video documentary that was seen on television all across the nation, and you can pick that video up. Now, I'm not going to tell you where to go buy it, but just look for these things, and I believe you can order her book from any reputable bookstore. What about these reports that you've got here?
Well, the sheriff departments and the police departments and the counties in which these cases occur are usually really confused. It's a confusing situation right from the opening gun. The veterinarians are confused because they do not make any. Most veterinarians, police officials, unless they've had particular experiences, personal experiences, are not much UFO oriented. They just are real skeptical. When you talked about UFO presence at the scene of some of these cases, and that's true. And also the ghost helicopter thing. There's a fellow named Tom Adams in Texas who's done a lot of work in cattle mutilations, and he has a large booklet that he's put out called The Choppers and the Choppers, because these ghost helicopters very often appear unmarked, usually totally unmarked, black helicopters or dark blue. No insignia, sometimes no lights, sometimes lights. They appear sometimes before the mutilations, sometimes after, sometimes both. There's been speculation that from farmers that have seen the helicopters that the government's involved. They think the government has been experimenting on their cattle. I've got a case right here in my hand from my part of the country where the fellow thought that they had been gassed. He thought the government was doing some kind of, as far as he was concerned, evil biologic experimentation. I found out 20 miles from me in Crawford County. I live in Upper Grant County in southwestern Wisconsin, right on the edge of the Wisconsin River. Across the river are two other counties. Within 3 miles of me is the way the bird flies. One's called Crawford County, the other's Richland County. Crawford and Richland County, since the middle 60s and up to the present time, have had a lot of cattle mutilation. Some UFOs seen in the vicinity at the time of some of these mutilations. Now, if in an area with a radius of roughly 20 miles, I've got 11 cases here. Then if I move a little bit into Richland County, away from Crawford County, another 10 miles, in other words, another 10 miles eastward, I can come up with half a dozen, actually more than that, a dozen or more other cases.
And within the last couple of years, hasn't there been quite a bit of UFO activity in the state of Wisconsin?
Yeah, there has been the last couple of years. There seemed to be a period a few years ago when slack time, but now the sightings have increased again. Matter of fact, I live 4 miles from a little town of 450 people called Blue River, Wisconsin, which is a very pretty name. I wish I got my mail there. But I have to get my mail from Bosco Bell, which doesn't sound nearly as enchanting as Blue River, Wisconsin. But an evening ago, or about a month and a half ago, late in the evening, many of the people in the town saw a large UFO hovering just outside the town along the river. The town itself is really on the river. But I've learned a great deal. My neighbors down the road, who are very fundamentalist Christians, told me that we just happened to be talking once, and they knew I was interested in the UFO phenomenon, and they said, well, we had one when we first moved here. And I said, well, how long ago was that? And they said, 12 years. She said, I got up in the middle of the night, and one was hanging by the bedroom window, and she said, I got my husband up, and he walked over, and he saw it too. But anyway, let me talk a little bit about these particular cases. They're kind of interesting. There's the Jernquist family of Eastman, Seneca Township area, had 3 cattle mutilated in 1990. Some of these are good cases because they're kind of exemplary. They are much like many other cases that you run across all across the country. They had 3 cattle mutilated. One of the cows had its udders cut off. Now, the other 2 didn't have any discernible cuts on them, and this occurs fairly often, where some of the cattle will be mutilated and others of the herd, the same herd, on the same day will have been injured, it appears, and some will die later, and some will recover.
Do they know what the cause of death is?
No. When you read right here in front of me is a veterinarian's report. When you read some of the veterinarian reports or crime labs, when the state sometimes will send to a county some of its official veterinarians, and they'll take it back, the carcass back to the crime lab and explore and autopsy what happened. They still remain confused. Richard Bohm, a farmer in 1975 in Crawford County, told me he lost 6 cattle. 4 of them were dead on the scene. Many of them had, 4 of those cattle had incisions, genitalia removed, udders. They had been really worked over, you might say. 2 of the cattle, actually 4 others were sick. So 4 were already dead, 4 were very sick. One of those 4 that were sick immediately died. Another one was real sick, and they sent it they crated it up, it died, and they sent it to Madison, to the crime lab. And Boone tells me that, and I can tell from reading the veterinarian report that he said the lungs, when they exposed the lungs looked like they had almost been gassed. They had a reddishness to them, like they'd been burned by a gas.
Exposed to some chemical gas.
And when I look at some of the veterinarian reports from Crawford County, you see often indications of micro hemorrhages in the cardiac area, in the heart area, and in the lung area. Now, what technique is used to stun these cattle? Initially, I don't know what would cause that sort of thing, but I find that micro hemorrhaging thing kind of interesting because it suggests there's terrific stress applied to some of these animals, and it must be very, very quick. But some of them it's also kind of cruel because some of these animals are injured and live for a week or two and then die.
Well, so that would rule out the theory that some people propound that these cattle are ill and they die of some natural causes, and then these wounds are caused by predators.
Right. I've got reports right here in front of me where the veterinarians will say, they'll say, we saw these incisions. We saw the genitalia and the anus and the uterus is cut out, or the lips removed from the calf or cow, what have you. And obviously this was some agency outside of nature was involved here. I mean, some agency outside of disease and things like that. But then at the end of their report, because they just don't know what they've got and they don't know how to handle it, and that's partly understandable, they'll say, but the cattle didn't look like they had been fed well enough, or they were slightly deficient in vitamins, and they'll put down cause of death, animal predation, just like you said. Because they got to come up with something. The police department says you have to draw a conclusion how these animals die.
They also have to live in their community and
that's right.
And support their practice.
That's right. And you can't in these small towns, believe me, because I live in southwestern Wisconsin now, and all we have are small towns. You can't put in the local newspaper in too strident terms, sensational terms, we've got UFOs mutilating our cattle, because first of all, many of the farmers are not acquainted with the UFO phenomena that is going on, and secondly, they get rather excited and
well, my family came from farm people.
Yeah.
Who settled in western Texas and Oklahoma, and farmers are not dumb; they're not stupid, but they tend to concentrate on what they do and in their rural area. Yeah. And right. I would venture to say that most farmers may not have heard of or know much about UFOs at all, and would be prone to discount it as someone's hysteria. And there's nothing wrong with that.
They're too busy trying to survive these days. Here's a case. I just want to give you an idea. That case, I'm reading right now from a Sheriff Philbox report. He was gracious enough to let me Xerox this. And it says, necropsy report. Cattle 1, no mutilation, lungs, etc. Cattle 2, Hereford, 68 years old, dead about 100 yards south of number 1 along a fence. No evidence of struggle, no external wounds. Laying more or less upside down alongside new barbed wire fence. So you see, here's 2 so far with no external wounds. And then we come to the third one. The third cow, however, left ear excised. Perineal area about 9 inches by 5 inch section of skin excised, including rectum and vulva. 4 functional tits excised. And then it talks more about the udder here. 4th cow, left ear, vulva excised, then left ear, 1/2 removed. You know, why didn't they take? Sometimes they'll often take the whole ear. Why did they take half an ear? You know, and yet it's not Satanist, because I should have gotten this in earlier, because they don't have the kind of. First of all, the cuts are so consistent across the country, and secondly, the kind of instrument that's used doesn't suggest even someone with a sharp pocket knife or butcher knife. It's an instrument.
Isn't it true that some of these law enforcement agencies, in an effort to explain these away, Because in all of these thousands, and I've been able to come across over 10,000 documented cases of animal mutilation. Now, you'd think somebody be caught. No one has ever been caught, ever been prosecuted. Nobody has ever even been suspected.
Yeah.
So one of the ways that they tend to get people away from speculating is they always come out with this story that it's probably a satanic cult.
Yeah. And some of the people, and some of the ministers in the local communities do believe that. And I saw in this particular sheriff's department file.
It helps fill their.
Yeah, I saw lots of. I noticed the sheriff's department had received from someone or somebody quite a few tracts on satanic cults of one kind and another. But that's not the answer. And like you say. There are no footprints found.
That's right. No footprints, no cigarette butts, no gum wrappers, no nothing.
Right.
In fact, in most cases that I've investigated, there is no signs of struggle, no marks on the ground where the cattle tried to dig in their feet and resist. Right. Except for one, it's the only one I've ever found. It's where one particular cow was apparently paralyzed, except for the neck and head, and had thrashed its neck and head back and forth so hard that it actually had dug about 1.5 foot deep hole in the ground. Now, to realize what kind of agony an animal had to be in to do that, and not be able to move any other portion of its body is just absolutely incredible. It's heart-rending to me.
And in some cases, not the majority, but still a significant number of cases, the carcasses are found some distance away from where the cattle were at the time they were being pastured, or perhaps were some distance away from where they were killed. It appears in a few cases out west, the cattle were dropped after they had been lifted up, perhaps into some kind of craft, and then dropped from the air.
Correct. Now, back to the helicopter thing. We have in our investigations found that the United States government does possess helicopters which are, quote, silent, unquote. And apparently that if this thing is hovering about 10 feet above your head, the only noise that you really hear would sound something on the level of an egg beater in your kitchen, which means if you were 100 yards away, you wouldn't hear anything.
Are these jet helicopters?
I have no idea what the propulsion system is. I would find it very difficult to believe that they could bring a jet engine down to that sort of silence, but not impossible. And there have been enough reports of helicopters being sighted in the vicinity that
right now in Alabama, one of the cases, one of the farm women looked out and saw a helicopter with, she said, with 3 men in suits. Now I wanted to, does that mean a coat and tie, or did that mean a jumpsuit? I assume it means a kind of jumpsuit. She was convinced they were human. This was right before some mutilation on that farm, so it's puzzling. I want to ask you a question. Do you think those are black berets, with the old black berets flying those helicopters?
Well, in the first place, I'm not sure what a black beret is. When I was in Vietnam, I was a black beret. The people who fought on the rivers in the Navy wore black berets. But
I got another question for you, because I'm interested in this. You're familiar with some of the reports of the underground guards in the underground facilities, and I saw some information circulating, and I'm curious to have your reaction about it. And they said that these individuals, they were called, I guess, black berets, were recruited. They were orphans. All of them were orphans,
the information that I have is that people who are recruited for super black projects, ones that are so super secret that they'll probably never be revealed, even any time in the future, are recruited from the ranks of orphanages or orphans. Simply because if anything happens to them or they disappear, they can be transferred on a moment's notice, and since they don't have any family, nobody starts asking any embarrassing questions. And we took this and we set out to try to find some orphans. And something incredibly suspicious has happened. It is very difficult to find orphans. Now, I'm not drawing any conclusions from this.
Adult male
orphans. It's very difficult to find an adult male orphan, but you go to the statistics and you find that there are a whole bunch of what should be adult male orphans in this country, but where are they? Now, maybe we weren't looking in the right place. Maybe we didn't have the right approach. I don't know. But I would certainly like to look into that a little bit more.
It's disturbing to think that an official arm of the government would select people like that, because I mean there's something that bothers me that they say, well, we want orphans because nobody will give a damn or know what happened to them if something does happen. So, but it bothers me about whacking huts being used as security on land that you and I are supposed to be able to walk on, because that's a very
unconstitutional.
Well, first of all, it's unconstitutional, right? And it's sinister as hell, because I mean, here you have a non-official agency that's been hired by your government to chase you around and maybe rough you up if they have to, at least scare the hell out of you.
Yeah. And nobody has to answer.
You heard Boylan's story, about what they shot his tire out with, what he thought was a kind of laser type of rifle, and then walked over and said, "Gee, you got a flat tire."
Well, I've been out there many times.
Have you interviewed him by any chance?
No, but I've heard the story. I've been out there many times, and I've had quite a few run-ins with those people. But I'm a little different breed of cat, and I'm more likely to reply with whatever they use. So they pretty much leave me alone, because I know my constitutional rights. I carry a copy of it on me, and I'm a little bit different kind of person to play with than most people that go out there.
I've heard they've fined some people up to $2,000 just to dissuade people from wanting to...
Well, I don't know about that, but they have confiscated cameras illegally. They stop people and demand identification and social security cards and stuff illegally.
I'm just a camper. I'm on Bureau of Land Management when I got my tent here.
Well, most people are intimidated by a uniform and a gun, and instead of doing the right thing, which would be to ask for identification, are you a law enforcement official? Well, no. You have identification? Well, I can't show you my identification. And then what I say to them is, in that case, that makes you a bandit, and you better get away from me, because if you're a bandit, I'm going to protect myself with a weapon. And the next thing I know, the sheriff comes out and says, well, we hear you threatened somebody. I said, no, I didn't threaten anybody. I said, some bandits came up, and they had weapons, and I asked them for identification. They refused to show it, and they were getting pretty threatening and pretty authoritative, as if they were law enforcement officials, and then I show the sheriff my press credentials and tell him what I'm doing out there, and give him a copy of my book and autograph it, tell him to read it, and remember that they work for the people of Lincoln County, Nevada, and not for the Whack and Hut Corporation of the United States government, and that sort of sets them back. I mean, I say, whoa, this guy knows what he's talking about.
Right, and they're not used to that.
They're not used to that, and then they go away and leave me alone. So,
what do you think about the Aurora phenomena, where the ship seems to come out from the Pacific and finally move across land and around Thursday mornings and settle down in the Area 51 area?
The government has always denied an Aurora aircraft. However, we found an item in the black budget named Aurora. We also know that they do have something that replaced the SR-71, because we know that they would never ever retire the best aircraft. So when they retired the SR-71, we knew that they not only had something to replace it, but had something for quite a while. Now, I have witnessed some kind of a triangular-shaped aircraft. It's so high when I've seen it that I can't tell anything more about it, that it's triangular-shaped, and it leaves sort of a trail of smoke that resembles links of sausages.
I've seen some film footage of that.
And it's just incredible. I don't hear any noise when it flies over. You hear sonic booms out there all the time, and what is the origination of the sonic booms, you can never tell, because there's always so many aircraft in the air. So we believe that this Aurora is capable of taking off under its own power, going into a high orbit, and then returning to Earth, and may be able to do something more than that. We don't know. But basically, it would have to be able to outperform the SR-71, and that's what we base our conclusions upon. And through our contacts in the intelligence community and in the United States Air Force, it's been pretty much confirmed off the record. No one will go on the record, of course, because then they could get in trouble. But off the record, it's been confirmed, and Many people have made statements, even on the record, that what we have in secret is so absolutely phenomenal that it made Steven Spielberg and George Lucas drool with envy. That pretty much tells me.
I wouldn't be surprised, though, because I'll tell you why. I am convinced of some of the crashes in the late 40s and 50s, and later than that, in this country, Mexico, and other places in the world. And I do believe that we've made a stupendous effort. I mean, a stupendous effort if a crashed vehicle is located in any kind of salvageable condition at all. A tremendous effort would be made to reflect, to duplicate the technology. And I don't discount Howard Menger's types of statements. Menger was an early contactee, for those of you that aren't familiar with the early days of the UFO movement in this country. If it's a movement, that's probably the wrong word. But anyway, Menger said he worked with the government in the early 60s, and that they were trying to build a saucer and a shuttlecraft, and according to Menger, they succeeded. So I wouldn't be surprised if they've been able to duplicate some of the technology that they found intact at crash sites. I wouldn't be surprised they've had technology that would blow our minds 30 years ago, and they probably upgraded that technology now. It frightens me a little bit because I don't know if we're worthy of handling this type of technology.
Well, I think of that. I look at my great grandmother who died when she was 89 or something like that. I mean, she was really an old lady. Used to tell me stories about coming across the United States in a covered wagon. She was in some of the Indian Wars in West Texas where people were killed and burned out, and she went from that to Boeing 707's television, indoor plumbing, and indoor plumbing to her was the greatest thing that there ever was. And she survived that, which boggles my mind. I don't know how those people could have survived that much of a culture shock, which is what it is, really. But what scares me is the evolution of technology at such a rapid rate that you can't keep up with it.
Right.
And that eventually what happened in 2001, which was on a microcosm, a battle between man and his own technology, and they'd forgotten to build in a switch to turn this thing off.
Hermann Hesse, the German novelist, years ago in one of his works, I can't even remember which one it was, said, but I know what the situation was. It was placed, the scene was placed in the future. And one of the characters said the world culture had come to a crashing stop. And the statement made by one of the characters was, gee, they had all that technology and all that knowledge, but they couldn't retrieve it. It got to the point where nobody could, even with the electronic capacity that they had, no one could quite figure out what plug to push and what button to throw. And
that's so challenging. But the whole gist of your research now into this cattle mutilation thing is that somehow this is connected with the results in the blood research.
Right. I think, in other words, the blood may well be part of the process of making, let's say, hybrids, half human, half extraterrestrial hybrid. And they may be using the cattle blood to facilitate that kind of...
or some kind of human genetic experimentation to create...
I think there's all kinds of genetic experiments going on with us and with some of the extraterrestrial species. I also think there are a lot of species visiting us. You want to hear what I consider statements that are somewhat amusing but also shocking?
Sure.
I said to John Lear not too long ago, John, how many extraterrestrial species do you think may be visiting us? Just offhand. He said, let's see. He said maybe over 80. And then I said to Colonel Wendell Stevens a couple of days later, I said, Wendell, how many extraterrestrial species, just off the top of your head, do you think might be visiting us periodically or in numbers, but at least visiting us now and again? And he said, well, maybe a couple of hundred. Now, I don't know how many, and I don't know if the public's ready for that kind of information, but I'm convinced that there are several dozen.
And in any case, until we can prove it or disprove it, we certainly can't rule it out. Remember, folks, you're not to believe anything that you hear here or anywhere else or anything that you read unless you can personally check it out and verify it in your own research, but we're bringing you information that you cannot hear anywhere else except on the hour of the time. Good night, and God bless each and every one of you.